A Moscow court sentenced a poet to 7 years in prison for reciting verses against the Ukraine campaign during an anti-mobilization protest last year. Artyom Kamardin, 33, was sentenced alongside Yegor Shtovba, 23, who also took part in the protest and received a sentence of 5 years and 6 months. The two were seen behind a glass partition in a heavily guarded courtroom. Just before his sentencing, a smiling Kamardin recited a poem that refers to poetry as gut-wrenching and often disliked by people accustomed to order. After the sentence was read out, there were cries of "shame" from supporters in the courtroom, some of whom were later detained by police outside the court building. Russian authorities have detained thousands for simple acts of protest against the offensive in Ukraine, with criticism effectively outlawed. Kamardin said his detention was particularly violent, claiming that officers raped him and forced him to film an apology video while threatening his partner. On the eve of his arrest in September 2022, he had recited his poem, "Kill Me, Militia Man," on a Moscow square where dissidents have been gathering since the Soviet era. Kamardin also shouted offensive slogans against the Imperial, New Russia, project aiming to annex the south of Ukraine. Both were convicted of inciting hatred and calling for activities threatening state security. Kamardin had told the court he did not know his actions broke the law and asked for mercy. "I am not a hero, and going to prison for my beliefs was never in my plans," he said in a statement. Around 24 friends came to support the defendants along with the poet's parents and wives. Kamardin's wife Alexandra Popova was in the crowd. Nikolai Denico, who was arrested at the same time, was sentenced to 4 years in prison last May after entering a pre-trial agreement, according to OVD-Info. These are the latest in a string of heavy sentences against Russians who protested the offensive, in trials critics denounce as absurd. In mid-November, Judge Oksana Demyasheva sentenced artist Alexandra Skokolenko to 7 years in prison for swapping price tags with slogans criticizing Russia's offensive in Ukraine. The trials of ordinary Russians usually take place away from public attention, unlike those of prominent critics.